Well, I want to give a warm welcome to all those that are watching today. If you're watching there in Pitt Meadows, a huge welcome to you. If you're at Commercial, huge welcome to our Commercial campus. And you got some fans here today. And also, if you're over there at Strathcona, big welcome to you guys as well. We're excited for what God's doing at each one of these campuses. We are a church that meets in 4 different locations. We also meet here at 1160 West Georgia, right under the apex of the city skyline. We also have those that are watching online or maybe listening on podcast, and we want to welcome you as well and pray that just today this message really encourages you, strengthens you, and equips you for the storms of life. So, folks, would you give all those that are listening and watching today a really warm welcome? We're glad to have you with us today. And then, church family, I want to say personally a huge thank you for the birthday card notes that you wrote last week. I went home and read them throughout the week. It was exceedingly, abundantly, above over all I could ask or think. And I just was so honored by the things that you wrote, the encouragement that was there. And I just want to say thank you. That's not even enough, but thank you for your encouragement. It was very rich. It was so rich, it's like, having a piece of banana cream pie. You can't eat it all at one time. I had one slice, and the next day I'd sit down, have a cup of coffee, and I'd have another slice. And I finished the last slice today, and I just enjoyed it all week long. It was just like this banana cream pie. And but the good thing about this, I can have it all over again, and I can enjoy them again. So thank you for that. I really mean that. We love you, and we felt your love coming, and it was really encouraging. So thank you. And then thank you for those who wrote something on Facebook. You put that on the church Facebook or on Pastor Cheryl's Facebook. I don't happen to have a Facebook account. Just haven't quite got there yet. I have some other things. I like Instagram and LinkedIn, and Cheryl does the Facebook, and we work it that way. But thank you for those who put something on Facebook. I read this week on Monday, the founder of Facebook had made this announcement. Mark Zuckerberg had said that, that there are today 1 billion people using Facebook. That's 1 out of 7 people. It literally has been a world-changing platform that's come. And, I think it's interesting the way that it's changed the world. Someone said that Facebook is like a fridge. Even when you know there's nothing new there, you still go on and check it every 10 minutes. I see people in lineups. I was waiting for my coffee, and they're just flipping through their Facebook, and then their lineup was slow, took it back out, flipped through Facebook again. There's nothing new there, but I just got to check it. Someone else said about Facebook, behind every successful student, this is for all the parents listening today, behind every successful student, there's a deactivated Facebook account. Then also I just had a couple of pictures that came along about Facebook. I thought I'd put a couple of these up for you tonight. The first one is how to make money from Facebook. Just go to account settings, press deactivate your account, go to work, step 3. I see all these, clickbait, how to make money. Well, this is a secret one right here. Then there was another great thing about Facebook. It's a warning, log off warning. You have been online for 1 year. Do you wish to log off and get a life? Yes or no? Or remind me next year. So then there was just one other one, and this is, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may update your Facebook status. I haven't had that yet when we've married somebody, but I have had them check at the last minute. And anyhow, it's a lot of fun to watch what's happening. Facebook has made a change in the world. Vocabulary has changed. Friend became a verb. We also had new things around friend, defriend, and just the whole definition of friend changed. They say now there's something called real-life friends and Facebook friends, and there could be a difference between the two. One psychologist said, the challenge is that now you just defriend somebody, whereas before when you played in the sandbox, you had to learn how to work it out. And those tensions actually help develop skills for your life, and so they were concerned about that. So who really knows the effect of it? But it's made an effect in the world today. There's no doubt about it. It's a tool. You could use it for good or bad, but it's a tool. The church changed the world. Facebook's had an effect on the world, no doubt. but the effect of Facebook pales to what the church has done in the last 2,000 years. That's some of the history. There's been some dark pages in our church history, but overall, the church has had an amazing positive effect around the world today. From hospitals to universities to slavery, all these issues. You can talk about them and do research. There's books have been written on it. I won't get into all of that. But one of the champions of the church was, of course, the Apostle Paul. He's one of my heroes. And like I said last week, I can't wait to get to heaven and meet him. I think he's just this amazing, amazing leader. We're going to be in Acts chapter 27, 28. So if you want to click over there in your Bibles, we don't turn anymore. We click over. If you want to click over to your Bible and find that chapter, and we're going to spend just a little bit of time in these two chapters. If you are into sailing, you're going to enjoy these two chapters. How many here today sail or enjoy sailing? Okay. Does anybody have their own sailboat? Okay, I see one hand, maybe two. Is if you're into sailing, you'll recognize that Luke knew something about sailing. Paul knew something about sailing. There are those who have studied nautical terms, and this account of sailing from Syria to Italy is extremely accurate. And so we won't go into all the details of it, but it's very accurate. I find it interesting that Dr. Luke spends 2 chapters on this. And all those little details are, I think, there for a reason. Because he knew that how many years later we want to go back and check the accuracy of it. And when you can trust the details that Luke puts into this, then you can also trust the message that's here. And when we see God at work in the lower story, it also gives us faith that he's at work in the upper story and vice versa. And God was at work here in that upper story. He's weaving something. In the lower story, it looks like one terrible storm. It's the perfect storm. It's an incredibly dangerous time. They're in a typhoon. They're in a Katrina. I think today is, if I remember correct, this weekend is the 10th anniversary of Katrina. Well, Paul and the ship, they lived through a Katrina. They lived through a typhoon, if you like. I don't know if Galen is here today, but he told me one time about a storm that he went through that reminded me of what Paul endures here. The thing about this story that's unique is Paul's put on the boat as a prisoner. On the boat, he has the lowest ranking. He's prisoner. He's in chains. By the end of the story, he's captain of the boat. How does that happen? That's what we want to study tonight, because there are leadership principles in this amazing story that we'll want to take a look at. When we start off in chapter 26, Paul has come from Jerusalem. He arrives in Caesarea, which is on the coast there. And we can even put up a map, or you have a map on the back of your handout as well. But he arrives here. He's gone from Jerusalem, and he was in Caesarea. And at that place there, he's actually there for 2 years, got chased out of Jerusalem, really wanted to go to Rome. He delivered a large financial offering to the church there, ends up in Caesarea, and his life was threatened. They were trying to kill him in Jerusalem, and he escapes up to Caesarea with some help of Roman guards, and now he's there for 2 years, and he appeals to Caesar. He wants to go to Caesar. He must go to Rome, and so thus begins the journey. The King Agrippa, who he talked to, he gave his testimony to. And remember, earlier on, Jesus said, you will be before the Gentile world, you'll be before the children of Israel, but you're also going to be before leaders. And he appears before King Agrippa, and he gives his testimony. That's why it's good to know how to tell your story, because you just never know who's going to be your audience. And to Paul's credit, he brilliantly tells his story. And that's in Acts chapter 26. And later on in Acts 26, he shares with him there how he persecuted the church, how he went after those that professed the name of Jesus. And he has such a convincing argument that this king says, Paul, all your studying has made you mad, because Paul was, remember, he was smart, he was academic and so forth, and he was a brilliant communicator. And Agrippa says, you almost convinced me to become a Christian. And Paul said, man, I wish you would be a Christian. And so Agrippa likes him. He thinks he's a good guy, really. There's a lot of favor that this king passes on to him. He's a Roman citizen after all, and he's going to put him on a boat to go towards Rome. We know he's got two buddies that are traveling with him. We know Luke is traveling with him, Dr. Luke, the guy who wrote Acts. And then there's also another companion that is going to be traveling with him. And we read about him in Acts chapter 27, verse 2. Aristarchus travels with him. So he's got two traveling companions. Now that's important to note because, remember, Paul's a Roman prisoner. He's in chains, and Luke and Aristarchus say, we'd like to come with you. Some people believe they went on board as Paul's slaves. Some people said, hey, take us as prisoners with you. Some say, well, Luke went along as a doctor. We're not sure how they got on board. Some say they paid their own way. But either way, they're in for a long, hard ride with Paul. Isn't it great to have good friends that go with you through hard times in life? Paul had people with him in the boat in the storm of life. That's why life group is important, or an alpha small group is important. It's great to have friends come alongside you. And Paul's got two amazing traveling companions. Luke and Aristarchus, they go with him as they head out into this journey. Paul's going to face a storm for sure. It's not going to be an easy one. It's going to be a challenging time. But the stormy days will tell you more about a person than the sunny days will. Anybody can sing a tune on a sunny day at noon, but hey, when it's stormy and everything's going sideways and you're being pressed on every side, then we'll see what's really on the inside of you. And in this story, we're going to find out what's on the inside of Paul, because his strength, his leadership really rises to the surface. You know and I know that leadership is not a title. Leadership is the ability that you have in a crisis to rise to the top. We could call this message that leadership really is, or leadership rises to the top. And that's what's going to happen in this story as we follow along with the Apostle Paul. So let's get into Acts chapter 27. If you have your notes and you have your Bible open to that, it says that they got into a boat, and they get into this boat in Syria there, and I'll put the map back up. They want to get to Rome. That's the whole idea, is to get to Rome. And ideally, they wouldn't have had to go this way. This is where the typhoon happens. This is where the big storm happens between the island of Malta and this Crete island. This is where the big storm happens. And they get into Caesarea, and they come up the side, and they got one boat, and they're going to go along into here. They change boats over here. The boats are, as I pick up a boat here, it's a boat used for carrying grain from Egypt. It's not a cruise ship that they're on. I think Paul would have loved to have been on a cruise ship. They're not on a cruise ship. It's a freighter. It's an old freighter, if you like. And as they get on there, there's other passengers on there. There's content on that ship. So it's not pleasurable by any means. And this is what they sail out as they leave that port and they head out. In verse number 19, Paul had said to King Agrippa of Acts 26, therefore, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. I'm going to give you just a few simple points on his leadership today. As Paul finishes up his mission, we see some things about him. Number one, Paul understood his mission. And if you are a leader, and we all are leaders in some way, or fashion or another, we have to understand our purpose, we have to understand our mission. That's why we're going to have a night in Astoria, the first night, we're going to have Phil Cook talk about one big thing. You have one big thing. You have a mission, and here, you know what? Paul's saying, I have not been disobedient to the heavenly vision. I've not been disobedient to my purpose. Paul's going to get into a really bad storm. It's going to go sideways. It's going to get ugly. It's going to be a crisis. But you know what holds him in that? He has not forgot his purpose. And if you remember your purpose, if you remember your vision, when the storms of life come, it'll cause you to rise up and say, man, I can't quit. There's still something more for me to do. In the middle of that storm, he was saying, no, I got to go to Rome. I got to go to Caesar. We're not dying here. We're going over. You're coming with me, but we're going to get there. I have a mission. And he said this to the king. He said that to the sailors. I've got a mission. And I don't know about you, but when I get on a plane, I like to pray over the plane. I sometimes put my hand on the door as I go in, and I just say, Lord, I know I've got more to do yet, and this plane's making it to the other side. And I sometimes feel like talking to the people as I walk down the aisle. You're really blessed to have me on this plane because God's not done with me yet, and we're going to the other side. And at one point, Paul says, God, or the Lord had spoke to him and said, you're going to make it, and all those who are with you are going to make it. To Joseph, he said, Potiphar's household was blessed by you. The jail was blessed because of you. And it's not an arrogant thing, but I think there is a blessing that comes when salt and light is there for others that are there. Paul and Silas were in jail, worshiped the Lord. We talked about that a few weeks. But everybody's chains were loosed. It wasn't just Paul and Silas. Jesus said the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And so the blessing was more for just Paul. It affected others that were around him. In Acts chapter 27, when Jesus appeared to him on that night, he said, we'll get into it in just a minute, but he said, don't be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. Indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. All those who sail with you. Take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as he told me. You must be brought before Caesar. He knew that he had a purpose. He knew he had a vision. And leaders know, I got a purpose. I have a vision. And so that keeps you going in hard times. When your family's under attack and you go, no, I got a purpose for my family. When your company's under attack, no, there's a purpose for our company. We're going to go through this thing. Leaders know their mission. He also took responsibility. They head out, and it says in verse 9, now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them. So they've sailed on, and they've come to Fair Havens. I'll put the map back up. They've done some sailing, and the weather's gotten bad. It's not the best time to be sailing. It's October, the year's 59 AD, and you're not supposed to be in this Mediterranean Ocean that time because of the storms. And they've changed ships. They're in Fair Havens, and Paul's going, you know what, guys? I've already been shipwrecked twice. I got a little bit of experience in these boats, and I know you are the sailors, and you're the captains, and you're the centurion, but can I say something here? I want to speak into this situation. So here's this prisoner on a boat. There's 200 and some people on the boat, and he stands up and has something to say. And here's what he says. Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only the cargo of the ship, but also our lives. Wow. That's a bold thing to say as a prisoner, isn't it? Can you imagine yourself on a plane, and you said to everybody on the plane, you know what? Could I have the mic, please, stewardess? I don't know what mic he got, but he got the mic, and he says to everybody, you know what, I have an announcement to make. This is not going to end well. We're going to lose the cargo, or we're going to lose our lives if we go on. That's taking responsibility. That's a leader stepping up. And he steps up, has this to say, and as a result, nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Now, keep in mind, he says here, their lives are going to be lost. I'm going to come back to that, but that's a very important thread in the entire story. So he takes responsibility. Leaders take responsibility. He's not hiding in the shadows somewhere, waiting for somebody else to do something. A leader doesn't look for an office space. He is not looking for his business card to be printed. He's looking, what can I do to make a difference? Doesn't have to be told. He's just, I'm taking responsibility. He treats it like it is his own, and he's all in. And so this is Paul. He's just stepping up. Hey, you know what? I've been here before. I don't know if we should take this step. And he cautions them not to. Then as we go on, we find that they leave this port, and they head out, and they're trying to get to the other side of this island, putting the map back up. They're trying to get over to Phoenix here and hang out there for the winter. And and hopefully they could just get across to this place, but this wind comes up. It's this massive wind called, it's in verse number 14, but not long after, a tempestuous headwind rose called Euroclydon. Does that sound like a strong wind? Euroclydon. This Euroclydon hits them. And it's this typhoon. It's Katrina. And it attacks them. There's this big wind that blows in there. And they no longer can make it over to Phoenix. They're pushed around this little island here of Kata, and they're going to be pushed out into this open waters, and it's going to be so dangerous out there. They try to get under the shelter of this island, and they're doing everything they can to secure this boat. They put the cables underneath it, and if you're a seaman and you read that, you'd understand the lingo when they get rid of their anchors and what they're doing with. They have a skiff on the boat, a little dinghy, what they do with that, and all the seaman practices they're doing it. They're trying to survive one of the worst storms written about in the Bible. And it's the wrong time of the year to be out there. Well, we pick up the story in verse 20. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat upon us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. All hope that we'd be saved was given up. Have you ever reached a place where you just felt like, I'm in such a storm, I want to give up? That's where they're at. They're just like, we're just going to die. We're out in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, and we're going to die here. It's over. There's no hope left. And they're here, no hope, and they're just like, it's over. At that point, Paul speaks up again. Because leaders have a way of encouraging others and not giving up, of being resilient. And this is what Paul does. He steps up with authority and confidence, and he speaks to them. He never gave up, and he steps up and speaks to them. So let me read what he says to them. But after long absence from food, hadn't eaten for a long time. Might have had something to do with being seasick, I'm not sure. The food's probably saturated with salt water, but they haven't eaten for a long time. And then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me." That sounds a little bit like I told you so, doesn't it? Guys, you should have listened. Remember back there in that other port, I said, it's not a good idea. Wrong time. Let's not go. And I'm not so sure that it was being, self-vindictive. I think it was more Paul trying to say, you might have forgot this, but I want to get your attention. I had an idea from the Lord before on this, and I want to make it clear now. Have I got your attention? We spoke on this before, in case you forgot. You've been fighting the waves for a few days here, weeks now, and I want to speak to you about this. So let me tell you something. You should have listened to me earlier and not sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And I urge you to take heart or be encouraged, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. Remember in verse 11, he said, but they'd lose their lives. Now he said, there will be no loss of life amongst you. So what has changed here? Well, let's read on. And this, now I urge you to take heart, no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve. Now this is something about, again, a leader. They know who they belong to and they know who they serve. Don't miss this point today. One of Paul's key strengths was, I know who I belong to. I know who I have believed, he said to Timothy, and I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed to him. If I've committed to him to go to Rome, I'm going to Rome. I know he's able to keep what I've committed to him. He's persuaded. He knows who he belongs to, and Paul knows who he's serving. Saying, do not be afraid. This is what the angel said to him, a spokesperson of God. Don't be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God granted you all those who will sail with you. God granted you all those who will sail with you. Look at this. Let's look at it on here. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Granted you. Granted you. Why is that there? Because Paul prayed for this. Earlier on, he knew that the ship would be lost and lives would be lost. God gave him insight into it. But something happened between that day and this shipwreck, Paul was praying. Luke was praying. Articus was praying. When God gives you a word, even a personal prophecy, they're partial, they're conditional, they're progressive. And if you have a dream, let's say, if somebody's been in a car accident, or you have just wake up one night and something's really heavy on your heart, you know, oh, they're going to die. Your role is to pray to change that situation. You go into what we call intercession, and you stand in the gap for them. This is a classic example where Paul stands in the gap for prisoners, for those that are on the boat with him, people that he doesn't even know. He's been praying, so God grants him that. There's something about our prayers that are powerful in heaven. God granted him this, and he said they're all going to be saved. So he says, take heart, men, for I believe God, and it'll be just as it was told me. So he stood up and he spoke with authority and confidence. A leader has confidence. A leader's not afraid to speak up and say something. This is Paul rising to the surface. Remember, he started off as prisoner, led onto the gangplank as a prisoner. And now he's speaking to the people. They didn't listen the first time. And now, hey, you know what? Maybe we should listen to this dude. And so they're listening to him. Paul exercised unwavering faith because he says here, take heart, men, I believe God. And that's something a leader has to do, is just trust God. Walk by faith and not by sight. Did it look like they're going to make it? Are you kidding? Let's put the picture back up. Here's where they are. They're out here somewhere. They're afraid that they could come down into the sandbars are here, and they're in this storm, and they're going to land in Malta. There is a bay there called St. Paul's Bay. And they happen to hit a part of this island that's got a sandy cove. There's rocks on either side of it. It's, folks, like finding a needle in a haystack. They haven't seen daylight for days. They're in the middle of the storm, and Paul stands up and says, we're going to be okay. The boat's going to be lost. Nobody's going to die. Our ship's going to be grounded, but we're going to come safely to an island. The odds of that happening, how long did they look for those Malaysian planes that went down in the middle of the ocean? To hit that island at that place with nobody dying, the odds are astronomical. But Paul had faith. He had heard from God. He said, that's where we're going to land. Incredible boldness, incredible faith. I think Paul also cared about other people. It says in verse 3, when we started out, 27, that when they landed at Sidon, the centurion was kind to let him visit people, and they cared for him. The reason they cared for Paul is, I think, because Paul cared for people. What you do comes back to you. And he was a caring person. We know that he interceded, that he prayed for the other prisoners. That's caring. And we see throughout this time, even when they didn't have food and they hadn't been eating, now when he makes this announcement, he said, okay, it's going to be all right. We're going to lose the ship. We're going to lose the cargo. And they throw it all overboard. And I'm sure the guy who owned the ship wasn't too happy because all his profits were being thrown out, but he was glad to live. The soldiers were concerned because if they lost a prisoner, whatever was that prisoner's sentence, you had to take. A lot of them were heading to the arena to be entertainment. And that's where they would have ended up. So it was a lot of pressure on them as well. But Paul said, hey, we're all going to make it. Paul cared about the people. A leader rises to the surface not because he just speaks when it's right with authority and has faith, but he also really cares about people. Paul prayed, he wrestled in prayer for these people to be saved. He says to them, take some food, be encouraged. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it. I know you haven't been eating, but here's the bread. Now let's eat and let's go on. We're going to make it. So he cared about others. And then lastly, Paul leads by example. They land on this island of Malta. The natives there treat them well. They're going to make a fire to warm up. It's cold, freezing. They've been blown into this island. Can you imagine that? And they get there, and the Roman soldiers are worried about them, and they're watching this other soldiers carefully, and the captain is there and all the people. And Paul had really taken charge over the boat. We know that in earlier on, he had addressed Some of the sailors wanted to get away on the dinghy. He said, hey, Captain, don't let them do that. Get them back in line. And the captain said, okay, Paul, let's get them back in line. And so Paul had captained the boat. So he had really risen from the lowest rung to leading this ship. And now when they're out gathering sticks for their fire, Paul isn't sitting back and saying, yeah, get some sticks over there. Hey, I think there's some over there. Yeah, bring them in there. Come on, get this fire going. And he's not. He's gathering sticks. So Paul's leading by example. Of course, during the process, the snake comes up and bites him. And the local people say, oh, boy, the sea didn't get him, so now the snake's going to get him. Justice will be had for this man. And Paul shakes off the snake, doesn't have any damage to him. Reminds of what Jesus said in Mark. He shall take up serpents and not harm them. And from there, they end up going to the head of that island's place. He prays for this man's father who's healed. Entire island has revival. And from here, they end up going to Rome. In the upper story, God's at work. At the lower story, there's a lot of storm going on. But guess what? God has woven it all together to give Paul a platform to share. And sometimes in the storms of life, you say, God, what are you doing? But if we'll take Paul's example and do what he did, we'll find that God will also allow us to rise to the top, to lead in a world that's desperately looking for leaders. Just a moment, we're going to pray, because some of you today are in the storm of life. And you're saying, how do I get through this? We want to pray for you today. We're also going to take communion today. Today's the last weekend of the month where we take communion, and we're going to remember what the Lord spoke to us there. And also we want to pray. You might be here today and you've never received Jesus into your life. That is the anchor for your soul. That is definitely what you need for the storms of life. You need the one who walks on the water. You need the one who's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords to come with you, and he's waiting to do that. At this time, I want to invite our campus pastors to come up, and they're going to be praying with you. They're going to be serving communion, and you might be in a storm of life, and we have a prayer team, and we want to pray for you today. So I invite them to come up, and musicians to come up, and we'll be taking communion together.